20 of the best doctors in Arizona stood frozen around her bed, shaking their heads. Detective Laura Bennett's life was slipping away, and not a single test explained why. Machines beeped, prayers were whispered, and her family prepared for the worst, until a prisoner on the top floor leaned against his cell bars and whispered just three words. Three words that every doctor had missed, but that would change everything. Suriname, the red digits on the hospital monitor flickered like a countdown clock, each beep punctuating the silent panic in the room. Detective Laura Bennett, 34 years old and once the fiercest presence on the streets of Phoenix, now lay motionless in a hospital bed. Tubes snaked from her arms, oxygen hissed from the ventilator, and 20 of the city's top doctors circled her bed, eyes darting between test results and one another with unspoken dread. Laura had always been a force. She wasn't just respected within the department, she commanded loyalty. Her partners said she had instincts sharper than radar. Criminals whispered her name in holding cells, knowing that if Detective Bennett was on your case, you didn't stand a chance. But none of that strength mattered now. Her skin had turned pale beneath the fluorescent lights. Her lips carried a bluish tinge, and her chest rose and fell with a mechanical rhythm, no longer her own. The call that had brought her here had come at 3:47 a.m. Officer down, a phrase that froze every cop's blood. Her partner, Officer David Collins, had radioed in with shaking hands, voice breaking as he described finding Laura convulsing beside their patrol car on a deserted downtown street. No gunshot wounds, no knife, no signs of a struggle, just a sudden collapse, as if her body had betrayed her mid-breath. The emergency department had mobilized instantly. Dr. Emily Carter, head of Phoenix General's ER and a veteran of 20 years, had rushed into the trauma bay. She had seen nearly everything: overdoses in nightclub bathrooms, strokes mid-flight, poisonings that puzzled even the textbooks. But Laura's case, it was a cruel puzzle. Her body was a battlefield of contradictions. Seizures racked her nervous system. Her lungs gasped as though drowning in invisible water. Her heart stuttered into erratic rhythms. Yet every test Dr. Carter ordered returned empty-handed, as if mocking her expertise. Blood work? Normal. Brain scans? Clean. Heart structure? Perfect. Nothing explained why the strongest cop in Phoenix was slipping away. By sunrise, the hospital had assembled its most elite medical team. Specialists hurried in from their homes, white coats flaring like capes as they gathered in conference rooms and outside Laura's ICU chamber. Neurologists pored over brain activity charts. Cardiologists frowned at EKG tracings. Toxicologists cross-checked panels for hundreds of substances. Infectious disease experts flipped through thick binders of rare conditions. Each one brought their sharpened knowledge, but each one walked away with furrowed brows and shaking heads. Laura's parents, Evelyn and Richard Bennett, had driven through the night from Tucson. They sat huddled in the chapel, hands entwined, whispering prayers between sobs. Her mother replayed the last phone call in her head. Laura promising to visit next weekend, promising she was careful, promising she'd always come home. Now machines kept that promise alive. Upstairs, Captain Angela Moore, Laura's commanding officer, stormed through precinct records with a fury born of desperation. Had Laura crossed paths with a dangerous enemy? Had someone poisoned her? Angela personally reviewed 6 months of case files: drug busts, gang crackdowns, domestic disputes. Nothing unusual. Nothing screamed revenge. Laura had been thorough, professional, by the book. No loose ends. And yet, here she was, dying without a cause. Back in the ICU, Dr. Jonathan Hayes, the hospital's chief neurologist, studied Laura's EEG, watching the jagged, chaotic waves dance across the screen. "This looks like toxic exposure," he muttered, his voice tight, "but there's no toxin we can pinpoint." Dr. Naomi Green, head of toxicology, flipped through her latest reports. "I've tested for over 300 compounds," she said. Exhaustion etched into her face. Heavy metals, synthetic drugs, organic toxins. Everything. Negative. 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 Yet the symptoms scream poisoning. Frustration hung thick in the air. Each doctor confirmed a piece of the puzzle. Irregular heart rhythms, neurological dysfunction, respiratory distress. But the whole picture remained invisible. The medical team was fighting a phantom. As Laura's condition worsened, her partner David Collins paced the waiting area like a caged animal. His uniform still carried traces of dust from where he'd knelt beside her body in the street, screaming her name, begging her to breathe. Officers from across the precinct filled the hospital halls, some clutching styrofoam cups of coffee gone cold, others holding each other in silence. The department was a family, and Laura was one of their best. Watching her fade without explanation was unbearable. Meanwhile, life outside the hospital marched on with cruel indifference. Ambulance sirens wailed in the distance. Phoenix streets buzzed with the hum of early commuters. At a diner across the street, people ate pancakes, sipped coffee, and talked about the morning news. Unaware that inside Phoenix General, one of the city's finest protectors was fighting a battle that science couldn't name. Nurse Hannah Brooks adjusted Laura's IV drip, her hands steady though her heart trembled. She had seen critical cases before, but something about this one gnawed at her. The way Laura's body fought, the way the doctors circled helplessly, it felt wrong, unnatural. Hannah whispered softly, leaning close to Laura's ear. Hang on, detective. Don't you dare give up. On the fourth day, as Laura's body weakened further, a ripple of despair spread through the hospital staff. Discussions of end-of-life care had begun in hushed tones, words that made her parents break down in sobs. The chapel filled with officers and friends, praying for a miracle, begging for answers. And that was when the story shifted. Not in the ICU, not in the polished conference rooms filled with degrees and credentials, but 3 floors above, in the county jail ward. The jail occupied the top 2 floors of the medical complex, a controversial arrangement that merged punishment with healing. Among the inmates was Daniel Reed. To most, he was just another convict serving time for armed robbery. But Daniel carried a past few here knew. Before prison, he had been a paramedic for 12 years. He had worked bloody accident scenes on highways, soot-choked fires, frantic emergency rooms. His hands had steadied countless lives on the edge of death. Prison had taken his freedom, but not his knowledge. Inmates often came to him with medical concerns, chest pains, dizzy spells, diabetic emergencies, and Daniel, with nothing but instinct and memory, often saw what the prison doctors missed. Whispers about the dying cop downstairs reached Daniel's cell quickly. In prison, news traveled faster than light, especially when it involved law enforcement. Most inmates smirked, muttering dark satisfaction. To them, a cop in pain was justice twisted back on itself. But Daniel felt something different. Years of saving lives had burned a principle into him. Patient first, badge second. Someone was dying, and it gnawed at him. During a routine checkup with Nurse Hannah, who sometimes worked both in the jail ward and the hospital floors, Daniel saw the exhaustion in her eyes. "Rough week?" he asked, his voice low. She hesitated, then sighed, glancing around. "We've got a patient downstairs, a detective. 20 specialists can't figure out what's wrong. She's slipping away, and we're out of answers." Daniel leaned forward, every fiber of his paramedic instincts sparking awake. "Tell me the symptoms," he urged. Hannah hesitated, but something in his voice, calm, professional, familiar, made her trust him. She listed them softly: seizures, heart irregularities, neurological decline, breathing problems. Daniel's mind raced. He'd seen this cocktail of chaos before. Not often, but enough to know it wasn't random. Patterns began snapping into place like puzzle pieces only he could see. Environmental exposure. Maybe. Something slow, insidious, not showing up on conventional screens. His chest tightened with the weight of possibility. That night, lying on his cot in the dim jail cell, Daniel stared at the cracked ceiling. 20 doctors had failed, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he knew the answer. The question was, would anyone listen to a convict? The jail ward at Phoenix General smelled faintly of bleach and rusted metal, the scent of two worlds colliding, medicine and punishment. On the surface, the hospital floors below thrummed with the organized chaos of beeping monitors and bustling nurses. But 3 floors up, the clang of bars and the shuffle of shackled feet created an entirely different rhythm. It was a place where lives paused, where time felt heavier, where the outside world only arrived in fragments, through a flickering TV bolted to the wall, or whispers between inmates passed from cell to cell like contraband. Daniel Reed lay on his narrow cot, the thin mattress creaking with every movement. The ceiling bore the same stain he'd stared at for months, a watermark shaped vaguely like the state of Arizona. Most nights, he counted the cracks in the plaster until sleep finally dragged him under. But tonight, sleep refused to come. His mind spun with images of the detective he had never met, but somehow couldn't stop thinking about. Laura Bennett, the woman fighting for her life just below his feet. He saw flashes of symptoms Hannah had whispered to him. Seizures, cardiac arrhythmias, neurological decline, respiratory distress. Each detail replayed in his head like a loop. He remembered cases from his paramedic days, men pulled from sewers, factory workers collapsing on the job. The signs were nearly identical. Not a disease, not a virus. Something from the environment. Something insidious. Daniel clenched his jaw. He had the answer, or at least a strong suspicion. But who would believe him? To the outside world, he was just a felon, a thief with a record, a man whose credibility had evaporated the day he was arrested. He imagined walking into that ICU in an orange jumpsuit, trying to tell 20 white-coated specialists they'd missed the obvious. They'd laugh him out of the room. Worse, they'd dismiss the theory outright just because of where it came from. He rolled onto his side, eyes burning. Still, the oath he'd once carried as a paramedic whispered back at him, "Do no harm. Help when you can." That promise didn't dissolve in prison. It was carved into him deeper than any criminal record. The following morning, during his routine medical appointment, Daniel decided to take a chance. He sat across from Dr. Samuel Clark, the jail's medical coordinator, a man in his late 50s with a salt and pepper beard and eyes that had seen too much but still softened when he looked at patients. Dr. Clark had always treated Daniel with a level of respect unusual for prison staff. He had once trusted Daniel's instincts during a diabetic inmate's seizure, when Daniel's quick intervention had saved the man's life before the guards even arrived. That small victory had earned Daniel a sliver of credibility. "Doctor," Daniel began carefully, his voice low so the guards stationed by the door wouldn't overhear. "I need to talk to you about the cop downstairs." "Doctor..." Clark's pen froze mid-scribble. He looked up slowly, suspicion flickering in his gaze. "That's not your concern." "Reed." "I know," Daniel said quickly. "But I think I can help. I used to be a paramedic, 12 years on the job. I've seen cases like hers before. Symptoms nobody could explain until it was too late. I think I know what's killing her." The room went still. The hum of the fluorescent light above seemed louder. Dr. Clark leaned back in his chair, studying Daniel with a mixture of doubt and curiosity. "Go on," he said finally, his tone cautious. Daniel swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the moment. "Hydrogen sulfide poisoning," he said, 3 words that seemed to suck the air from the room. Dr. Clark frowned. His medical mind instantly conjured the image of rotten eggs, the telltale smell of H2S gas. "That would show up on toxicology," he countered. "Not if the exposure was slow, chronic, low levels over weeks or months." Daniel pressed. His voice grew steadier, the paramedic in him awakening. By the time she got to the hospital, the gas would have broken down in her blood. The tests would look clean, but the damage, the seizures, the heart arrhythmias, the respiratory collapse, it all lines up. Dr. Clark tapped his pen against the table, his skepticism visible but cracking under the weight of Daniel's certainty. Where would a patrol officer be exposed to hydrogen sulfide? It's not like she's working in a refinery or a sewer line. Daniel leaned forward, his voice urgent. Her car, if the exhaust manifold is cracked, if the catalytic converter's failing, the gas can leak into the cabin. Think about it. Hours every day sealed inside a patrol car, breathing it in. At first it's just headaches, fatigue, maybe nausea. She probably thought it was job stress. But over time, it poisons everything. Until one night, she drops. The words landed like stones in water, rippling through Dr. Clark's mind. He wanted to dismiss it, to remind himself he was talking to a convicted felon. But the logic was too sound to ignore. Even if you're right, Dr. Clark said slowly, how do I bring this to the team downstairs? They'll ask where it came from. They'll want sources, credentials. I can't tell them an inmate solved what 20 specialists couldn't. Daniel's mouth curled into a bitter half smile. Don't tell them. Present it as a theory from a consulting paramedic. You don't need to mention the source. Let the evidence speak for itself. Check the patrol car. Run the specialized metabolic tests. If I'm wrong, I'll fade back into this cell and no one will care. But if I'm right, she lives. For a long moment, the two men sat in silence. The hum of the fluorescent light, the distant clang of prison bars, the faint murmur of voices in the hallway. They all blurred into nothing. Dr. Clark studied Daniel's eyes, searching for deceit, arrogance, or desperation. Instead, he found conviction, pure, unflinching conviction. Finally, Dr. Clark nodded once. I'll make some calls. When Daniel was escorted back to his cell, his heart pounded with a strange mix of fear and hope. He sat on his cot, staring at the cracked ceiling, whispering the three words again under his breath like a prayer. Hydrogen sulfide poisoning. Meanwhile, in the ICU below, Detective Laura Bennett's condition worsened. Her EEG showed dwindling brain activity. Her parents had been gently prepared for the worst. Nurses moved quietly around her, adjusting machines that now seemed more like lifelines than tools. Captain Angela Moore stood outside the glass window of the ICU, her fists clenched, her reflection merging with the pale figure inside. She had promised Laura's family they would find answers, but the truth was slipping further away with each passing hour. Dr. Clark, carrying the weight of a prisoner's theory, reached for his phone and dialed Phoenix General's toxicology department. His voice was steady, but his pulse raced. Dr. Green, he said when the line connected, I have a consultation question about your officer case. Have you considered hydrogen sulfide exposure? Chronic? Low-level? Vehicle-based? On the other end, silence stretched like a held breath. The toxicology lab at Phoenix General was quiet except for the steady hum of machines. Dr. Naomi Green stood at her workstation, dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back into a loose bun that had given up hours ago. When Dr. Samuel Clark's voice came through the line, she almost dismissed it as another desperate grasp at an answer. But the phrase he used made her stop cold. Hydrogen sulfide exposure. Chronic, vehicle-based? Naomi pressed the phone tighter against her ear, her mind instantly flipping through protocols and results. We tested for it, she said quickly, then hesitated. But only direct detection. We didn't look for metabolic markers. Exactly, Clark said. His tone carried both urgency and restraint, as though every second mattered. By the time she got here, the gas itself would have broken down. But the cellular enzyme disruption, check for that. You'll find your answer. Naomi's heart pounded. She'd been toxicologist long enough to know the arrogance of certainty. Still, Something in Clark's tone, something in the precision of his word struck her. She grabbed her clipboard, scribbled orders, and within minutes her team was running specialized assays for sulfhemoglobin levels, thiosulfate metabolites, and mitochondrial enzyme disruption. Downstairs in the ICU, Laura Bennett's monitors beeped with a rhythm that had grown weaker, more irregular. Her parents sat at her bedside, her mother whispering old childhood prayers, her father gripping her hand as though sheer force could keep her tethered to life. Officer David Collins stood guard outside the glass wall, jaw tight, fury and helplessness warring inside him. Dr. Emily Carter entered quietly, scanning the chart. She caught Evelyn Bennett's eyes and felt her chest tighten. She hated this part, the moments when families looked to her, not for science, but for miracles. "We're still working," Emily said gently. "We haven't given up." It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. In her gut, she feared they were hours away from losing Laura. Meanwhile, in the police department's underground maintenance bay, the detectives had begun following Captain Angela Moore's orders. Check Laura's patrol car. The vehicle had been towed in after her collapse and left untouched, waiting for answers that no one thought would come. Now, under the harsh glow of fluorescent lights, mechanics in hazardous materials, specialists in protective suits surrounded it. The lead mechanic, Jorge Alvarez, ran his hand along the undercarriage. "This exhaust manifold shot," he muttered, shining his flashlight into a jagged crack. He waved over the hazmat team, who immediately set up gas detectors. Within minutes, the sensors blinked red. Hydrogen sulfide. "Dios mío," Jorge whispered. "She's been breathing this for weeks." The hazmat officer shook his head grimly. "The leak runs right into the air intake system. Every time she turned on the ventilation, she was pumping poison straight into the cabin." Angela Moore stood nearby, arms folded tightly, her badge glinting under the fluorescent lights. Her throat felt dry as she listened. She'd spent her career protecting her officers from bullets, knives, criminals in the street. But this, a faulty piece of machinery turning one of her best detectives into a walking corpse? Rage surged in her chest. "Document everything," she barked. "Photos, samples, reports. I want the manufacturer on the line within the hour. And pull every patrol car we have into inspection immediately." Back in the toxicology lab, Naomi Green's team huddled around results dripping from the printer. Elevated sulfhemoglobin levels, enzyme disruption consistent with H2S exposure, mitochondrial activity patterns exactly like the case studies she'd read years ago about sewage workers and refinery employees. Her pulse raced. It matched. It all matched. She sprinted down the hallway, papers clutched in her hand, and burst into the ICU conference room where Emily Carter and Jonathan Hayes were reviewing Laura's failing EEG. "We have it," Naomi gasped, holding up the results. "Hydrogen sulfide poisoning, chronic exposure, vehicle exhaust." For a beat, silence filled the room. Then Jonathan slammed his fist on the table. "Of course," he muttered. "It was right in front of us. We've been looking for an acute toxin, a one-time exposure. But this is weeks, months, slow damage." Emily's face lit with relief and frustration all at once. Relief because they finally had a name for the enemy. Frustration because it had taken them so long to see it. She immediately began rattling off orders. High-flow oxygen, antioxidant therapies, sodium nitrite if needed. Prepare hyperbaric if we can get clearance. Move, people. Nurses scattered like sparks from a fire, rushing to implement the new treatment. For the first time in days, the ICU felt alive not just with fear but with purpose. As the treatment began, subtle changes appeared. Laura's oxygen saturation inched upward. Her heart rhythm stabilized marginally. Her pupils reacted more sharply to light. Small, fragile victories, but victories nonetheless. Upstairs in his cell, Daniel Reed sat on his cot, staring at the ceiling stain shaped like Arizona. He didn't know what was happening below, but his gut told him the gears were turning. He whispered the words again under his breath. Hydrogen sulfide poisoning. He imagined the doctors frowning over test results, the shock on their faces when they realized he'd been right. He'd never hear their praise, never see the nods of respect. But maybe, just maybe, he'd saved her life. In the maintenance bay, Angela Moore's fury grew as reports poured in. 17 other patrol cars showed varying degrees of exhaust system damage. 3 were serious enough to be death traps like Laura's. She thought of the dozens of officers who had unknowingly strapped themselves into vehicles that could kill them slowly, invisibly. She called the precinct immediately, her voice sharp as a blade. Ground every car until it's inspected. I don't care if it cripples the department. I won't lose another detective to this. By midnight, the city of Phoenix was buzzing with rumors. Word spread through squad rooms, through families gathered in hospital waiting areas, through the press sniffing around for a story, a detective poisoned by her own car, a fleet under suspicion, questions about negligence, about liability, about how many officers had already been exposed. But inside Laura's ICU room, none of that mattered yet. Her mother stroked her hair gently, whispering, "Come back to us, baby. Just come back." Her father clutched her hand, tears sliding silently down his weathered cheeks. And on the monitors above, for the first time in days, the numbers began to rise instead of fall. Emily Carter watched, her chest tight with cautious hope. "We might just have a chance," she murmured. The hum of the ventilator had become a cruel soundtrack to Detective Laura Bennett's life. But now, for the first time in nearly a week, the machine's steady rhythm was accompanied by something new. The faint, almost imperceptible signs that her body was fighting back. Dr. Emily Carter leaned over the monitors, her eyes scanning the numbers that only days earlier had offered nothing but despair. Oxygen saturation climbing, heart rhythm steadier, pupils reacting briskly to light. They weren't miracles. Not yet. But to a veteran physician like Emily, they were proof that the tide had finally begun to turn. "She's stabilizing," Emily whispered, though her voice trembled with restrained hope. She didn't want to give the family false promises, but in her chest, relief flooded in like sunlight through a storm cloud. Evelyn Bennett, Laura's mother, looked up from the bedside where she had been praying almost without pause. Her rosary beads dangled between her trembling hands. "She's coming back?" Evelyn asked, her eyes wide with a fragile mix of fear and hope. Emily crouched beside her. "It's too early to say how much recovery we'll see. But yes, your daughter is responding to treatment." Evelyn broke down in sobs, burying her face in her husband Richard's chest. He held her close, his own tears streaking down weathered cheeks. "That's our girl," he whispered. "Fight her to the end." Outside the ICU, Officer David Collins pressed both hands against the glass, his forehead leaning against it. His partner, his friend, was still alive. He replayed the night she collapsed again and again, the helplessness of watching her convulse, the desperate calls into his radio. Now, maybe, that memory wouldn't be the last image he carried of her. The next 12 hours unfolded like a battlefield turning in favor of the wounded. High-flow oxygen therapy flushed her bloodstream. Antioxidants coursed through her veins, working to protect what cells hadn't already been ravaged by the invisible gas. Nurses adjusted IV lines, checked her vitals, recorded every subtle change. It was exhausting, grueling work, but every small improvement felt like a victory parade. When her fingers twitched for the first time, Nurse Hannah Brooks gasped and nearly dropped her clipboard. When her breathing strengthened enough to reduce ventilator support, the room erupted in cautious cheers. And when her EEG showed the faintest uptick in brain activity, Jonathan Hayes, the neurologist, actually smiled. A rare, weary smile that transformed his stern face into something human again. Still, no one forgot the danger. Hydrogen sulfide had wreaked havoc on Laura's body for weeks, maybe months. The damage was widespread. Recovery would not be measured in days, but in grueling months of rehabilitation, if she recovered at all. By the third day of treatment, Laura's eyes fluttered open. At first, it was only for seconds, pupils unfocused, gaze drifting like a lost ship. But it was enough to make Evelyn cry out, clutching her daughter's hand. "Laura, it's Mom. We're here. Baby, we're right here." Her lips moved faintly. No words yet, just the effort of a brain reawakening from darkness. But those flickers of awareness carried more power than any speech. David Collins rushed in from the hallway, his badge glinting under the harsh hospital lights. He gripped the rail of her bed, voice breaking. "You scared the hell out of me, Bennett. Don't you ever do that again?" He forced a laugh through tears, brushing a hand across his eyes. Laura's gaze wavered toward him. Her lips parted. A slurred whisper escaped, barely audible but unmistakable. "Sorry." The room went silent, then erupted with emotion. Evelyn collapsed into Richard's arms. David bent his head against the bed rail, shoulders shaking. Nurses exchanged looks of astonishment. Even Dr. Carter had to step back for a moment, hand pressed against her chest to steady the sudden rush of feeling. For the next week, Laura drifted between consciousness and exhaustion, her body relearning what it meant to live. Each time she woke, she stayed a little longer. She recognized faces, responded to questions, even cracked a dry smile when David teased her about missing paperwork piling up back at the precinct. But the toll was evident. Simple tasks drained her. Forming sentences was like lifting weights. Her muscles trembled when she tried to grip a cup of water. And sometimes, when fatigue set in, fear clouded her green eyes, the fear that she might never be the same again. One afternoon, as the Arizona sun cast golden light through the blinds, Captain Angela Moore visited. She entered quietly, her usual commanding presence softened by relief. "Detective Bennett," Angela said, pulling up a chair. "I don't think I've ever been so damn glad to see you open your eyes." Laura's lips quirked faintly. "Captain," her voice was still weak, each word requiring effort. "Am I off the clock yet?" Angela chuckled, though her eyes glistened. "For now, but don't think you're getting out of paperwork that easy." They shared a moment of silence before Angela grew serious. "Listen, Laura, we checked your patrol car. It was leaking hydrogen sulfide. It damn near killed you. And it wasn't just your vehicle. 17 others had problems. If you hadn't gone down when you did, we might have lost half the precinct before anyone noticed." Laura's eyes widened slightly, her brows knitting. She remembered the headaches during patrol shifts, the bone-deep fatigue she chalked up to long hours. She thought of the nausea she dismissed as stress, the blurred vision she blamed on lack of sleep. All the signs had been there, but she ignored them. "Others?" she asked hoarsely. Angela nodded. "We grounded the fleet, ordered emergency inspections. You didn't just survive. Bennett, you saved lives. Officers across this city owe you." Tears welled in Laura's eyes. She squeezed her mother's hand weakly. Then, it wasn't for nothing. The weeks that followed were a brutal climb. Physical therapy became her new battlefield. At first, simply standing made her legs quiver like saplings in the wind. She clutched parallel bars, sweat dripping down her face, teeth clenched in determination. Her therapist cheered when she managed 2 shaky steps. David often visited during these sessions, leaning casually against the wall with his arms crossed. "I've seen suspects run faster than that," he'd tease, earning a glare from Laura before she broke into a reluctant smile. His jokes weren't just humor, they were lifelines, reminding her she was still the detective who never quit. At night, fear returned. Lying in her hospital bed, the monitors glowing softly in the dark, Laura wondered if she would ever be whole again. What if her reflexes were too slow? What if her memory never fully recovered? What if she couldn't protect her partner on the streets anymore? One evening, as she stared at the ceiling, "Doctor, Carter pulled up a chair beside her. "You're thinking too far ahead," Emily said gently. "Right now, it's about the next step. Literally, the next step. And then the one after that. Recovery isn't about going back to who you were. It's about becoming someone stronger because of what you've survived." Laura blinked back tears, her throat tight. "I don't feel strong." Emily reached out, squeezing her hand. "That's because you're in the middle of the fight. You'll see it when you're on the other side." 3 weeks after her collapse, Laura took her first unassisted steps across her hospital room. Her parents recorded the moment with shaky hands, tears streaming freely. The nurses clapped. David whistled. Laura grinned through exhaustion, every muscle trembling, but her spirit unbroken. "I told you," she panted, looking at David. "I'll be back." And she meant it. The morning sun spilled across Phoenix General Hospital like liquid gold, catching on the glass panels of the upper floors. Downstairs, cameras flashed and microphones buzzed as reporters huddled outside the lobby, eager for updates on the city's most talked-about patient, Detective Laura Bennett. Inside, Laura stood in front of the mirror in her rehab room, balancing on legs that had nearly betrayed her forever. She wore gray sweatpants and a loose hospital hoodie, her hair pulled into a ponytail. The reflection staring back at her was both familiar and foreign. She still carried the sharp eyes of a detective, but now there were shadows beneath them, the faint ghosts of everything she had endured. Her therapist knocked lightly. "Ready?" Laura inhaled, nodded, and stepped forward. Every movement was deliberate, careful but steady. Each step was a victory, and she savored the sensation of walking unaided, of reclaiming her own body. Down the hall, her parents watched with tears streaming freely, their pride radiating like sunlight. Officer David Collins, her partner, leaned against the doorframe with a grin. "Not bad, Bennett. You're faster than half the rookies already." Laura smirked, breathless but determined. "Give me a few more weeks. I'll be chasing down perps again." But what struck everyone most wasn't just her physical recovery. It was her unshakable spirit. Against odds that 20 specialists couldn't solve, against the invisible poison that had tried to claim her, Laura had clawed her way back. And though she didn't know it, her survival was tied to a man 3 floors above, a man whose name would never be spoken in her presence. In the county jail ward, Daniel Reed sat on his narrow cot, flipping through a worn medical journal that Dr. Clark had quietly arranged for him to borrow. The fluorescent light above buzzed faintly. He turned the pages slowly, underlining sections with a pencil stub. His handwriting filled the margins, notes, hypotheses, fragments of memory from his paramedic years. He hadn't seen Laura. He never would. But through whispers from Nurse Hannah and glimpses of hospital staff celebrating in the corridors, he knew. She had survived. She was recovering. His theory had saved her. Daniel closed the book, leaning back against the wall. For a long moment, he let the rare feeling wash over him. Purpose, not the hollow satisfaction of survival in prison, but real purpose. He had made a difference again. Yet the irony wasn't lost on him. A convicted felon had saved the life of a police detective, someone who, under any other circumstance, would have cuffed him without hesitation. The system that punished him had also created the conditions where his knowledge became useful. It was absurd. It was beautiful. It was human. Meanwhile, Phoenix General embraced the case as a medical milestone. Dr. Emily Carter documented every detail for publication. Dr. Jonathan Hayes used the EEG patterns as teaching material for residents. Dr. Naomi Green spearheaded new toxicology protocols that required environmental exposure testing for mysterious illnesses. But in every presentation, in every case study, the official story was the same. A consulting paramedic with extensive field experience had guided them toward the correct diagnosis. The true identity of that consultant remained locked away in Dr. Clark's confidential files, hidden beneath bureaucratic discretion. Laura never questioned it. When Dr. Carter explained the poisoning, Laura was too stunned by the revelation of her patrol car as a death trap to think about where the breakthrough came from. She accepted it as medical persistence, as the product of brilliant teamwork. She thanked her doctors, thanked the hospital, thanked God. But she never thanked Daniel Reed. She never knew his name. Outside the hospital, the ripple effects grew. Captain Angela Moore ordered the entire police fleet grounded until thorough inspections were completed. Dozens of vehicles were repaired or retired. Officers attended new training sessions on recognizing chemical exposure symptoms. Across the state, other departments followed suit, spurred by media coverage of Laura's case. Automotive manufacturers scrambled to issue safety bulletins, recalling defective exhaust systems and installing new sensors in patrol cars nationwide. Federal safety regulators announced new guidelines for emergency vehicle inspections. Laura's near-death experience had forced an entire industry to confront flaws that could have killed countless others. She became a symbol, her photo and uniform splashed across newspapers. Her story told at safety conferences and medical symposiums. The detective who survived the invisible killer. But inside her heart, Laura saw herself differently. She wasn't a symbol. She was a woman who had faced her own mortality, who now walked with the fragile awareness that life could be stolen in silence, without warning. 4 months later, Laura returned to active duty. She passed her fitness test slowly but surely, determination etched into every movement. Her first day back, the precinct erupted in applause when she walked through the doors. Officers slapped her shoulder, hugged her, joked about how boring the place had been without her. David grinned from his desk. "You ready to actually do some work, Bennett? Or are you still milking the sympathy card?" Laura rolled her eyes, tossing a file onto his desk. "You've gotten soft without me. Time to catch up." Her return wasn't just about reclaiming her badge. It was about reclaiming her life. Yet she carried scars that weren't visible. Sometimes, during night patrols, she caught herself inhaling deeply, testing the air for phantom poisons. Headaches made her stomach knot with fear. Fatigue sent her spiraling into paranoia. But she pushed through. Every time her doubt whispered, her determination roared louder. She refused to let the poison define her. In the jail ward, Daniel's reputation quietly shifted. Inmates who once mocked him began seeking his advice for health concerns. Guards asked him subtle questions about their own family's medical problems. Dr. Clark funneled more difficult cases his way, disguising the consultations as field experience reports. Daniel became something no one expected, a resource, a hidden mind in a forgotten place, shaping outcomes far beyond prison walls. He watched news coverage of Laura's recovery from the small television in the common area. She stood at a podium, uniform crisp, voice steady as she spoke about officer safety. Reporters cheered, cameras flashed. Daniel sat silently, hands folded. He didn't need the world to know. It was enough to see her alive, enough to know that in some invisible way, their paths had crossed to change both their lives forever. 1 year later, Laura was promoted to detective sergeant. The ceremony was packed with officers, families, and press. As she pinned the new badge on her chest, she thought of the nights she'd lain in that hospital bed, wondering if she'd ever walk again. Now she stood taller than ever, her scars hidden but her strength undeniable. In her speech, she thanked her family, her colleagues, her doctors. She spoke of resilience, of teamwork, of second chances. "Sometimes survival isn't just about strength," she said. "It's about the people who refuse to give up on you, even when you've given up on yourself." The audience erupted in applause. Her words carried weight, touching every heart in the room. And yet, somewhere in the quiet of a prison cell, the truest line of her speech resonated most of all. Because one man had refused to give up on her, even when no one else could see the truth. Daniel closed his medical journal, the applause from the ceremony echoing faintly from the TV in the common area. He allowed himself a small smile. He didn't need a badge. He didn't need recognition. He had already found redemption in the life of a detective who would never know his name. Sometimes wisdom exists in places society has forgotten. Sometimes salvation comes from voices no one expects to hear. And sometimes the person locked behind bars holds the key to saving the ones sworn to guard them. If this story moved you, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with a friend, and subscribe for more incredible stories of survival, justice, and the unexpected heroes hidden among us.